Welcome back to another episode of History in Your Own Backyard. I'm your host, Susie Selleck, here today in Covington, Kentucky at the historic Linden Grove Cemetery. I'm joined by Pete Nerone. Pete, thank you for having us this morning.
Oh, thank you for coming out and filming for us. We're excited to tell you the story of the place.
Yeah, this is beautiful. Driving in, I mean, not only did we get this beautiful view of this like luscious cemetery, but got a little view of downtown. I can't wait to get into it with you. So let's just start, let's talk about really where we are, maybe how old the cemetery is, and let's talk about some of the fun facts you have going on here.
Sure. So this is historic Linden Grove Cemetery in Arboretum.
Yeah.
Arboretum is a new facet of the cemetery, but you can see from the sign back here, it was consecrated in 1843. And it's actually September 11, 1843. So tomorrow is a notable day for us.
Yeah.
And it was established by the Western Baptist Theological Society, which is why the neighborhood just to the north of us is called Old Seminary Square, because that's where it was based.
Yeah.
And this was considered high table ground in a rural setting away from the hustle and bustle of the urban city.
High table.
High table ground, which is why you can see part of the skyline of downtown Cincinnati from here.
Yeah.
This cemetery was the cemetery in the city of Covington for a couple of decades. It was a number of firsts about it. One is, even though it was founded by the Western Baptist Theological Society, it's non-denominational. So it was open to people of all faiths, and it also did not discriminate against whites and blacks. They initially had separate sections that they were buried in.
Okay.
But they were all were welcome in the cemetery. Unfortunately, the Baptist Theological Society had fractures in it over issues that ultimately led to the Civil War. And the seminary disbanded. It broke apart, and that kind of left the cemetery in a state of limbo as to who owns the cemetery, because the parent company now, was split and went different directions. The Civil War happened. This area behind us was used as a burial grounds for many of the troops that came here with wounds and died in the hospital following their wounds. Following the Civil War, the Army wanted to make this section a military burial ground.
Right.
But because
that comes with stipulations, right?
Right.
Okay.
They need to get a deed for that section. And because of the messiness of the breakup of the Western Baptist Theological Society, they weren't able to do so. And so finally, in frustration, they moved most of those graves down to Camp Nelson near Lexington.
Yeah.
Well, then a real estate investor named Samuel J. Walker, who was the son-in-law to Adeliza Keene Southgate, who was the widow of William Southgate, that was one of the 4 congressmen buried here. He secured the deed through the courts and made an arrangement with a new board of trustees appointed just for the cemetery. And that arrangement had that basically every lot sale, he got a part of that until he was paid off for turning over the property to them. Mr. Walker eventually moved on to Chicago. We don't know what happened to him from there, but because of that structure, the money wasn't going into a perpetual care trust.
Right.
The cemetery eventually fell into disrepair and was forced into receivership in 1946. And so during that period of time, while it was in receivership, there would be once or twice a year a big cleanup effort. There was still a Memorial Day parade ending here every year for the past 100 years through that period. So that would normally be when they would clean it up.
Okay.
Would be for the parade. And then eventually the city and county formed an interlocal agreement that established a new board to manage the cemetery.
Yep.
And some funding to help do that on an ongoing basis. And that's how we are here today.
And that was when? 1998 that started?
1998 was when the interlocal agreement was formed. And it was really, I think, a pioneering agreement between a city and a county for maintaining an old cemetery. In the early 2000s, there was a local area planning commission did a study of this neighborhood around the cemetery because of some expansion. 12th Street was going to be widened into a much bigger boulevard and renamed Martin Luther King Boulevard. And St. Elizabeth Hospital was going to build an ambulatory service back over here. And so there was some planning done. And part of the assessment of the Planning Commission was that this whole area had insufficient tree canopy, insufficient green space, and too much impervious surface. And yet 22 acres of Linden Grove Cemetery stood out as the best chance to counter those deficiencies. And that kind of gave us a new lease on life, so to speak, to make the cemetery more into a good open public space that it is today.
You guys have been hard at work, clearly. I've already seen a couple of people out besides us this morning enjoying it as well. So do you want to touch on anything else there with the Arboretum, or because you guys are level 1 there, right?
We are level 1. There are multiple levels, so we're working to get to level 2. Level 1 meant that we did a thorough documentation of all of the tree stock and shrubs that are in the cemetery. So we have a database where we have the GIS markings, each location, what the actual tree species is that's there, and then any maintenance notes going forward from that. Level 2 would mean that we establish educational programs about the Arboretum.
Oh, cool.
And so that's what we're working on now. We've got a project underway right now to put signage on a number of trees that identify the species, and also to add signage on a number of the notable graves that we could then link with a QR code to a document behind the scenes that tells a little more history of what it is.
That is cool. All right, I'm pulling for level 2.
We're eager to get there.
Okay.
And then level 3 is just picking up the pace, so to speak, and level 4 is actually conducting research. In the area. So we don't know. Level 2 might be our comfort zone.
One step at a time.
One step at a time. That's right.
That's great. That's great. Congratulations on that. I mean, this speaks to volumes of the hard work that's been put in here, especially.
I'm just a cheerleader on that.
Well,
other
a
people,
cheerleader of 12
our
years,
superintendent, Rick
right,
Ludlam,
Pete?
did all the hard legwork to get the Arboretum established.
Okay.
And everything.
All right.
And he had a lot of help.
Wait, and what was that person's name again?
Rick Ludlam. He's our superintendent.
Okay. Okay. All right, but just for establishing clarity, 12 years you've been part of this, is that right?
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
Very nice. It's a lot of work. That's a lot of time and a lot of work. It's
well,
very beautiful.
It is, but it's also enjoyable work.
Yeah.
And I live in the neighborhood. And I've seen an improvement in the neighborhood in those years since the cemetery's been under better management. I think a lot of neighbors prior to the interlocal agreement would have considered this a detriment to their property. And now they clearly see it as an asset.
For sure.
To their property, and you see a lot of investment going in around the neighborhood. A lot of people are spending time improving their lots, better landscaping of their yards, and better maintenance of the buildings. And you'll see a lot more people coming through here walking, just enjoying the open green space.
Oh yeah, that was me this morning. I've got heels on, but I'm like, yes, I want to walk through here. It's beautiful, and just as a person who runs, like, this is a kind of place I would absolutely love to trot through, walk through. Pete, talk to us about what was unique about the cemetery when it was first established.
Well, certainly. So it was actually modeled after a few cemeteries in New England that were considered a rural escape inside an urban setting, and it had a lot of neat features to it. So in this cemetery, it was designed to have walkways, not just roadways, but walkways through certain areas, It wasn't meant to be just a straight line, you know, rows and rows of graves, but have different sections designed around it. And then it had, the shape was a little different when it was started than it is today. So this area right over here, there's an active spring in the grounds that came through there. There was a creek that trickled down through a valley. The valley was a little deeper, and to a pond down by 13th Street, a small pond.
All right.
And then that pond drained on out into what was Willow Run, an old creek that came down where I-75 is today. But so it was set up a lot around the gullies and valleys that were here, and the open spring trickling down to the pond. And then the sections were built kind of around that area. And there were different trees planted in different sections. We had a lot of chestnuts here when it opened up, and that was one of those American tragedies where something got to the American chestnut and they're all gone.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to be bringing those back slowly. You know, there are some new species. But it was really set up to be a horticultural garden, not just simply a cemetery. And then the other pioneering features were that it was non-denominational, and that it was open to all races. And so those things were exciting for the area.
Pete, let's talk about some of the notable graves in the cemetery.
Oh, certainly. Thank you. So over this way, Thomas and Dinah Kennedy are perhaps you can't talk about the city of Covington without starting with them.
Okay.
They are the ones that turned over property in what is the historic Licking Riverside district at the, you know, where the Licking River flows into the Ohio River. They turned over property to then be laid out in a grid to establish the city of Covington. And they were buried in what was called the Craig Street grounds and were moved here when the railroad went through where the Craig Street grounds were. So we consider them the great-grandfathers of the cemetery.
Okay.
And then there are a number of the early, what I would call the investment bankers.
Okay.
The industrialists and investment bankers. And so you look over here, Arnold and Ernst and Gedge on the hillside over that way. They were the early investors in a lot of activities, including the first road from here to Lexington. It was the old Lexington Pike.
Cool.
And it started off as a toll road. The first toll booth was actually right off the grounds over here. Some of the bridges in the area, the bridge across the Licking River and the suspension bridge, they were part of the financing of building the Roebling suspension bridge. So they were very important. And then there's Dr. Louise Southgate, who was, for one, she was, as far as we know, the first female physician to operate inside Covington. But she is also a very notable suffragette, and did a lot of work on women's rights to vote, mobilizing women, and she made a lot of mission trips down into Appalachia. And so there was like the Hyman Settlement School, which was really destroyed by the recent flooding down there, but is now serving as kind of a mission base for relief in the area.
Wow.
She would spend some summers down there working in the area, treating people that didn't have access to doctors, and encouraging girls to get in school and go to school.
So instead of going to her lake house, she went down and helped heal people and encouraged young ladies to go and better themselves.
Absolutely. If I could raise one person up as a saint from the cemetery, Dr. Louise Southgate would be the first one.
I love her.
You know, and then you know, Simon Watkins and Adam Kelly are two African-American physicians. We think Watkins came here first, but they both went through Metairie College of Medicine, and in I believe it's in Nashville, Tennessee, and that was like the first college of medicine to welcome blacks in the South following the Civil War. And then they made their way up here and established practices here and became really notable citizens in the community as well.
Amazing.
You know, and so
amazing.
if I thought of how did hospitals get started here, 3 notable physicians that are here in Linden Grove need to be a part of any of that story.
Wow.
You know, and then one that we're really proud of, and it's just marked on her headstone, is Aunt Lou.
Aunt Lou.
Aunt Lou.
Okay. Who's
she's
Aunt Lou?
behind the veterans section over here. Letitia Robb grew up on a plantation in Lexington that was owned by the Noble family. Thomas Noble was a very prominent member of the Cincinnati Art Academy and the Cincinnati Art Club. And he was a childhood friend of hers on this plantation, even though he was the owner's son. And so after the war, he helped care for her, bringing her up here. And she actually served as the custodian at the Cincinnati Art Club for many, many years. And Henry Farney, who's a great landscape artist that is from Covington, she was a caretaker for him as well. And so when she died, the art club stepped forward to make a nice monument to her and put a really nice bronze plaque on it, you know, with a sculpted face of her as a tribute to her. It says, Aunt Lou, faithful to the end.
Pete, you're giving me goosebumps, and it's very nice out this morning, so
Yeah.
wow. Oh, what a story. Oh my gosh. I don't know. I mean, do we end with Aunt Lou? Does it get better than Aunt Lou? I don't know.
Well, you know, we have so Thomas Kennedy, we believe, was in the Revolutionary War. His grandson was a general in the War of 1812. And we have veterans of just about every war ever since then. The Mexican War, the Spanish-American War, the Civil War, you know, the First World War, the World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, scattered all over the cemetery. So it's really a place that has some notable early citizens of the city and some other more recent people. There's a lot of common people with very extraordinary histories ready to be told. And we welcome you for coming out to hear about them.
Oh, an eclectic cemetery. After 5 years, I can solidly say hundreds of cemeteries. This may be by far one of the most beautiful cemeteries, but very eclectic, incredible history. Pete, have I forgot to ask you anything? Is there anything else that you want to share with us before we wrap up here?
I just want to say that this is a great walkable space. Come on out and visit us. Spend your time walking. And if you're curious about any of the people or trees that you encounter here, ask us.
Yes.
And we'd be happy to tell you the stories.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for watching another episode of History in Your Own Backyard. I'm your host, Susie Selleck, coming at you today from Covington, Kentucky with Pete in Your Own. Pete, thank you again for joining us here in the historic Linden Grove Cemetery.
Thank you for coming to visit us.
And remember,
travel slowly and stop often.
Bye for now.